All right, guys, Murph's here, and today I want to talk about this, a Harrington and Richardson Model 950 double-action revolver chambered in .22 long rifle. Now, when we're talking about this, we're going to talk about a little bit of history. However, first off, this is not a terribly historic firearm, and we've discussed previously the history of Harrington and Richardson, so we're kind of going to gloss over that for the most part, but spend a little bit of time on revolver production from Harrington and Richardson. Harrington and Richardson was known for building kind of budget-minded pocket-type revolvers in a variety of calibers. Now, take that and bring it into the future, and in the later part of the 20th century, they would start producing a series of .22 revolvers that I refer to as the 900 series, because pretty much everything in the series had the pre-designator of 9-something, so 949, 950, all that kind of stuff, and a variety of features, mostly in .22 long rifle, but a couple were produced in .22 Magnum. Now, when it comes to these pistols, I've actually had a lot of trouble trying to track down actual production dates. And what I've been able to kind of cobble together from looking through multiple forums is that it seems like these guns started production around the 1970s and probably ended production in 1986 when Harrington and Richardson closed their doors. All right, guys, with that pretty much covers our history / background section, because that was pretty short, like I said. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get into features. So right off the bat, we have a 6-inch barrel. Now, these revolvers would be made in a variety of barrel lengths, but the 949 and the 950 would have 6-inch barrels. Now, what would be the difference between the 949 and the 950, you might ask? And that would be the finish. The 950 has this nickel plating, and the 949 was blued. Now, something that you'll note here, this is a pretty old revolver, and we have some flaking of our nickel coating here, which probably means that at some point this has been cleaned with some type of cleaner that breaks down copper. So that's unfortunate, but it does happen, especially when you're talking about a pistol of this age, and who knows how many different hands that it's passed through. Now, our front sight is kind of this rounded affair here, which kind of reminds me of like the front sight off of a cowboy style revolver, which several of the features on this handgun do kind of evoke that cowboy nostalgia, which would not be out of place for the 1970s. Now, you'll also note that we have a spring-loaded, I'll turn it to this side so you can see it, a spring-loaded ejector mounted underneath the barrel, which would not always be the case in the 900 series. Some would have unloading be done by removing the takedown pin and ejecting the individual cartridge casings out of the cylinder. This, however, does have the spring-loaded ejector rod, just like you would see on, once again, a cowboy revolver. Now, when we come to this side of the gun, this is where we kind of get away from the cowboy imagery. As we can see here, we have this notch-style rear sight, squared off and all that kind of stuff, so it's kind of high up off the slide. It's not the gutter-type sights that I would have expected off of a cowboy-style gun. We'll talk about these sights more once we get into shooting. Our cylinder is a 9-shot cylinder, which you get to by placing the weapon system on half-cock, opening the loading gate here on the side, giving a little counter turn, and then you're able to rotate freely through the chambers. You can see those are quite closely spaced. We'll talk about that more here in a second. Now, our hammer does have a small amount of serrations on it in order to better be able to grip it. We do have a transfer style safety, which you can kind of see right there, which is interesting. You don't necessarily always see that on revolvers, so I appreciate it anytime I see that type of more modern safety adaptation on this type of pistol. Now, our trigger is a double action, single action, which I've got to 100% admit here, guys, this is not my most favorite trigger. The single action is surprisingly kind of stiff, where normally single action triggers on double action revolvers are very, very light affairs. This is unusually stiff at the beginning. And when we talk about the double action trigger, again, there's a lot of stacking. It's very heavy, and it also has what I kind of consider to be a premature release. And a lot of that probably has to do with the short spacing between these cylinders. You don't have to have as much movement in the trigger mechanism in order to rotate the cylinders, so you wind up kind of releasing what feels like is early. You look at that amount of trigger and you would think that there would be more travel, but as you can see here, that it kind of stacks, it gets really, really heavy at the end, and there's really not that much movement. And again, we'll talk about that more here once we get to the shooting portion. Now our grip is, again, a bit of a departure. It's a smooth one-piece wood grip that is rather wide and has kind of an odd angle, in my opinion, that if this was a heavier recoiling cartridge, this, with the amount of space that I have between the trigger guard and the grip, this would be quite uncomfortable. But as it stands, the grip contour, as much as I may not like it, I do like how hand-feeling the grips are. We can see here that this is a full tang design. So these would almost be considered like Target grips in some places, if they have like more texture. All right, guys, that's features. How does it shoot? Well, one of the ideas I want to go ahead and capture here right off the bat is that this is an inexpensive plinker. Like this is an important thing to talk about here right now. This was not meant to be some sort of highly polished competition gun or anything along those lines. So when it comes to that, that is how it shoots. Now the sights, I do not love these sights, and that is primarily because there's really no contrast between them. It's very difficult to find that front sight at times. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't snap together very naturally, as much as it is to say that if it doesn't snap together very naturally, you're going to kind of fish around for it a little bit, and that I don't particularly care for. I find the sights to be rather indistinct. Now, already mentioned the trigger, and the trigger is kind of what kills this thing. So whenever it comes to 22 caliber handguns, for the most part, they're pretty accurate. That comes down to the fact that there's not a whole lot of recoil and all that type of stuff. However, when you introduce a heavy double action trigger, that does kind of throw your groups all over the place. Now, at the end of the day, when it comes to handguns, I'm really not that concerned on pinpoint accuracy. This is plenty minute of man capable on pretty much any target that you could possibly pick out. And I think for its real use and purpose, which is fun plinker, this gun is perfectly acceptable in the accuracy department. Now, I do have one complaint, and this comes down to light primer strikes. I had a lot of light primer strikes on this handgun. Now, at first, I dismissed it to the ammunition. I was using some bulk box Winchester, the 333 round boxes, you know, that bulk ammunition. That's what I was shooting through this gun, jacketed hollow point. At first, I dismissed my issues to the ammunition because light primer strikes in .22 ammunition are quite common. However, while I was preparing for this video, I remembered that I used this ammunition not that long ago in a variety of .22s, including a Ruger 1022, and I had no such frequency of failures. So now I kind of have a new theory, and I think it's this hammer spring is not doing what it's supposed to do. It's either undersprung by design or it's undersprung through years of use. I don't know which it is in this case. Now, that's not to say that this thing is misfiring every other cylinder, as much as I for sure have 1 to 2 light primer strikes per cylinder pretty regularly. And what I think it comes down to is with the kind of crowded nature of these chambers and this kind of short trigger pull, I strongly suspect that this is not getting enough tension out of the hammer spring to reliably ignite these primers. Now, this is something that you frequently run into in .22 handguns. There's a wide variance in .22 ammunition. There's a wide variance in .22 handguns. It's not that unusual to have .22, especially handguns, be finicky about .22 ammunition, .22 long rifle ammunition. So in this case, it is completely conceivable to me that this hammer spring is not up to reliably igniting this Winchester bulk box, and maybe it would be better off with some CCI stingers or something along that line. But it's just something that's important to keep in mind to shape our discussion moving forward, that I have had a significant number of failures out of this handgun. All right, so that's shooting. What are my recommendations when it comes to this handgun? Well, would I recommend this for duty use? self-defense, or home defense? And the answer is absolutely not for duty use, of course. Not only is it a revolver, but it's chambered .22 long rifle, and there is absolutely no need for anybody who has an actual professional duty type status to be carrying a .22 every day. When it comes to CCW or home defense, my answer is slightly more nuanced. And I actually have an entire video that covers this concept in the .22 long rifle suitable for self-defense video, which I have a link in the description. If you are able-bodied and in no way afflicted by disease or injury, there is zero reason for you to be carrying a .22. You should be pursuing a more major caliber, especially in a handgun, than a .22 long rifle. That is the long and the short of it. So I would not recommend this to any able-bodied person for home defense, self-defense. Now, what about like a woods gun, or perhaps walking around on the farm or something along those lines? This wouldn't be bad, especially if you were a trapper or something along those lines, something that you could dispatch animals in a trap with relatively easily. Or if you wanted this available for like snake defense or general kind of like varmint plinking or shooting at stumps while you're out doing your chores around your property and all that kind of stuff, this would be a pretty fantastic choice overall. This kind of goes into its plinker status, because that's what I really think the main niche for this handgun is, if you haven't caught that drift already. What about a hunting handgun? Though this would not be my first choice for a hunting handgun, for small game, of course, I could see somebody using this for that purpose. I would like a little bit more contrast in my iron sights, but this is a perfectly capable handgun if it is, in fact, legal wherever it is that you live for that purpose. All right, what are my uses for this particular handgun? Well, this has been an introductory gun more times than once. I have used this to teach new shooters firearms fundamentals and handling and all that kind of stuff. And I especially like this if that new shooter owns or is looking at owning a double action handgun, because this gives them an opportunity to be able to get used to a double action trigger and decide whether or not that's something they actually want to pursue. So if you know somebody who's looking at getting a snub-nose revolver as a carry pistol or something along those lines, this or something very similar to it would be a fantastic opportunity to teach them the nuances of double action triggers and perhaps talk them into something a little more modern. In a best case scenario, another best case scenario, just making them more prepared for their training with their designated CCW option. Now, another purpose for this handgun for me is that I use this as a training tool, as a low-cost training tool. Now, I have a holster and all that kind of stuff, and I will go out and shoot drills with this handgun. One of the important things to point out with shooting a .22 for training is that it is not a proper substitute for full-power pistol cartridge training or even rifle cartridge training. If you're looking at training with like a 1022 or an M&P 1522, you still at some point need to get behind that full power cartridge and manage that recoil and all that kind of stuff. But from a handling standpoint, from a sight acquisition standpoint, and in this case, a trigger manipulation standpoint, this handgun has plenty of good attributes to offer for training. And that's one of the reasons that I like keeping it around. All right, guys. I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.